Hello again, this is part two. I was going to make some notes from here again, so discussing this book, which was one of the first I read after being diagnosed. I don't know if I've mentioned much, but I'm just reading from the notes I made. But so intense interests, I think there's another bit on special interest, but intense interests. So I'm quoting Sarah Hendrickx directly in most places, but boys' interests tend to be object-based, trains, dinosaurs, space, while girls' interests tend to be people or animal-based, soap operas, fictional characters, animals and celebrities. The qualitative difference can explain why girls' behaviour may not be noted as being unusual due to the typical nature of their interests. That's from Simone 2010 and Wagner 2006. Whereas a boy who quotes endless facts about ancient history rather than playing football with his peers may be flagged as atypical, a girl who obsesses about a pop star would not necessarily be seen in the same way. The interest provides the same outcomes for both girls and boys on the autistic spectrum. Once immersed in your subject of interest, there is a predictability and escape from the chaotic real world. Talk about one girl getting fixated with, there was talk in the book about one girl getting fixated with certain people who she admired, and these can be real life, e.g., a girl at school or imagined. I mean, I've been through all that. And then fantasy worlds. Individually and privately, girls with autism are known to sometimes inhabit a rich fantasy world full of imaginary friends, animals and creatures. I'm sure I read this last time, so apologies if it's repeated. One said, I much prefer the company of my imaginary friends. Penny and her brother Johanna were my best friends, so no one saw them but me. I'm not sure Penny and her brother, I'm not quite sure, were my best friends, perhaps it was an imaginary brother. My mother tells me I used to insist that we set them places at the table, including them on our car trips, and treat them like they were real beings. The biggest universe, this is another woman, the biggest universe I ever created originally contained about 100 creatures, but this is now over 1,000, as this universe has stuck with me throughout my life. This fantasy is a place I would often slip into as a child, especially when I wished to avoid other people. I had an excess of 60 or more. I've made a mistake, I've kind of not copied that necessarily correctly. So I had an excess of 60, but it could be 600 imaginary friends, and I much prefer playing with these characters than interacting with anyone at all. It could be 60, but I totally relate. My sister and I have talked about this in the maladaptive daydreaming. We had characters, imaginary characters, still do. This is another quote, overwhelmingly what we see in girls is an unusual extreme identification with the characters in fiction books, TV programmes, and sometimes people they know and feeling attachment to. The girls actually become the character. They may involve reenacting scenes from the book, film or show over and over again, mimicry and getting lost in the fantasy to the point of having difficulty in separating it from real life. I mean, my sister and I, we just lived in with our imaginary characters and just became them. So that is just so resonated. Another quote, girls who do this, it was more of an escape to a better place from a real world that was difficult and sometimes unhappy. And that kind of clicked with me before I read this, maybe around the same time that, I never thought of that. I just thought it was something we did. I didn't realise it could have been interpreted as an escape, but now it makes sense. Another quote, I much preferred my imaginary world to reality and would spend as much time as I could, apart from when I was reading, thinking about my fantasy world. I often hated getting out of bed because that was a great place to think about my imaginary friends undisturbed, and having to drag myself away from that and return to reality was horrible and depressing. Again, God, having somebody to do that with was just much better. But we really look forward to doing that and being our characters rather than the boring real world. Oh, so yeah, there's another thing on interests, and then I will finish it for now and start another one another time. So intense interests exist throughout the lifetime of people with ASD, but they can change and develop with age. For young women in my sample, reading still featured heavily as it had done when they were children. Drawing, writing, sewing and collecting were all reported. The interests mentioned were solitary pursuits, and no one mentioned sharing these interests with peers. People still formed a significant part of the young women's interests, either through fictional characters or obsessions or crushes on people known to them. The solitary nature of these interests could lead to the assumption of shyness, isolation, depression or social anxiety, all of which may be the case, but which equally may mask underlying autism. I was into music big time. I preferred music from before my day and disliked the stuff my peers were into. I mean, music has always been, listening to music, yeah. I've spent much of my teenage and adult years reading fiction, playing computer games and watching fiction on TV. Many times I felt closer to fictional characters than real life people. That's another person. For many, I'll go on to the social and other things next time. So yeah, I just find that just resonated with me a lot, and I hope it does with you, maybe. And I shall go on to the social interaction that was mentioned in this book next time. Thanks very much. Bye.